Let me just start off by saying that I'm not proud of what I've done, or what I didn't do. While I didn't exactly have a choice in the matter, the guilt still gnaws at me. Seeing the light snuffed out of somebody's eyes will do that to you. For most, the consequences of witnessing a single kill would be enough to drive them to the brink of sanity, and I should know. I've caused multiple of them. The trouble started with my boyfriend Johnny. He had been staying out late, and I was convinced that he was lying to me. Johnny claimed that he was working, but I knew that it was complete BS work until midnight. Seriously. He had a typical 9 to 5, unless his boss was the worst on the planet. I highly doubted that my significant other was being forced to work 7 hours overtime on a multitude of different occasions. I just knew that Johnny was cheating on me. I mean, why else would he be coming home that late on a near-nightly basis? In my mind, there was no other explanation. So naturally, I decided to catch him in the act. I took another sip of coffee as my eyelids flickered between opened and closed for the umpteenth time. I warily glanced at the green blocking numbers displayed on the kitchen stove. 12:03. He was later than usual. Come on, Johnny, let's get this over with. I have work in the morning. As if he could read my mind, I heard the unmistakable sound of somebody fidgeting with the doorknob. The door swung open, and I immediately leapt into action. It was my time to shine. I stood from my seat at the table and flipped the switch on the wall beside me. The room was showered in light, illuminating my guilty boyfriend. Johnny stood as stock still, his mouth agape and his eyebrows raised. This was it. I had caught him. I furrowed my brows as I drank in Johnny's appearance. Something wasn't right. I was beginning to think that I might have screwed up with my little stakeout. Johnny's boots and blue jeans were caked in dry dirt. He was wearing a stereotypical beige trench coat. You know, the ones that shady people seem to adore. It was July. There was no reason that he should have been wearing one of those. In addition, his hands were slathered in some congealed crimson substance. I knew immediately that something was seriously wrong. Johnny, do you mind explaining why you're coming home past 12 covered in dirt and what I'm really hoping isn't blood? I demanded, attempting to sound confrontational. Instead, the words came out brittle and weak. Johnny glanced down at the ground inside, carting a hand through his jet black hair. I knew this day might come eventually. No point in drawing it out for longer than I have to. So I'll get straight to the point. Your eyes aren't playing tricks on you. You're dating a murderer. I stared blankly at him, studying his facial expression. I desperately hoped that all of this was just an elaborate prank, some kind of demented ruse to pull over one on me. But Johnny looked deathly serious. A sinking feeling in my gut told me that he wasn't lying. I hate to have to do this, Sarah. I really do, Johnny said, reaching into his trench coat. But you know too much. I'm sorry. He produced a handgun equipped with a silencer from his oversized pocket and pointed it directly at my forehead. My mind raced. A million different thoughts swirling around in my brain like a typhoon. I had to think of a way out of this. I didn't want to die. Not yet. There was still so much that I wanted to do with my life. In an act of pure desperation, I blurted out the first idea that popped into my head. Wait, let me help you. Johnny paused for a moment. His finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger, he pursed his lips, his gaze shifting to the ceiling. Explain. How do you want to help me? He asked, retraining his focus on me. I meant that maybe I could help you kill people. You could use a sidekick, right? You wouldn't have to worry about me going to the police, because I'd be implicated too. Please don't do this, baby. I'll do anything. I couldn't believe what I was saying. Was I really okay with this? No, obviously not. I was just grasping at straws. I didn't really have what it took to murder somebody, right? Johnny locked eyes with me, a wide grin inching across his lips. He lowered his weapon, placing it back into his pocket. You got yourself a deal. I released a breath that I hadn't realized I had been holding. Somehow, my harebrained scheme had managed to convince Johnny not to paint the walls with my brain matter. My mental reprieve was short-lived, however, because I was about to discover the weight of my decision. I'll take you in as my sidekick under 3 conditions. 1, you can't tell anybody about this, especially the cops. If you have me arrested, I won't hesitate to put a hit out on you. I have powerful connections, so even if I end up going to the big house, I can still call in a favor. My heart began to thunder in my chest once again. How would I never realize that my own boyfriend was this terrifying. Number 2, you will not try to murder me under any circumstances. If I even get an inkling of an idea that you might try something funny, I'll cut your throat without thinking twice about it. My eyes grew wide. Was he rattling these off from the top of his head? I mean, no, certainly not. He had put a lot of thought into this. And 3, you will do everything that I tell you to when I tell you to do it. You will follow every order to the letter, no questions asked. Do you accept my terms? I glanced onto the table and then met Johnny's stare. I barely recognized him anymore. I had spent 3 years of my life with this man. For 3 entire years. I had been dating a monster, and now I was backed into a corner. I had no choice but to nod in agreement. Fantastic. Get some good rest tonight, sweetheart. Johnny cooed, that Cheshire grin never leaving his face. Fantastic. Get some good rest tonight, sweetheart. Johnny cooed, that Cheshire grin never leaving his face. Your first training session begins tomorrow. Needless to say, I was thoroughly freaked out. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. I mean, how could I? My boyfriend, who had come home from killing someone just hours before, had revealed his twisted hobby, all while nearly satiating his bloodlust with me. And to put the moldy, decaying cherry on top of that cake, I had inexplicably offered to join him. What was my life turning into? I glanced over at the man who, for the past 3 years, I had thought that I wanted to marry. Johnny was lying on his side, facing the wall, snatching the blankets in his sleep like he always did. He was softly snoring, seemingly without a care in the world. I hated him for that. Every shallow breath, every light snore, every minor movement that he made, it disgusted me. How could Johnny sleep so peacefully at night, knowing what he had done, and what he was not only continuing to do, but forcing me into as well? He shouldn't get to be at peace with his actions. It wasn't fair. I wanted so badly to wring his neck. I think in that moment my mental state had begun to crack and rage was seeping through. It took everything in me not to creep to the kitchen, grab the knife that we had, and bludgeon my boyfriend to death for all the victims that he had claimed. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. In the end, the rage was only masking the one true emotion that I had felt since Johnny had arrived home. Fear. I could barely function at the office. Like my boyfriend, I had my own boring 9 to 5 gig. Let me tell you, if I could do it all over again, I would not choose to be an accountant. That's a horror story in itself, but I digress. The one good thing that I could say about my job is that people left me alone for the most part. I usually came in, got my stuff done, and got the heck out. But as you might have guessed, I had one of those coworkers. If you've ever had a job, then chances are you've had to deal with one of your own. If you've ever had a job, then chances are you've had to deal with one of your own. Mine's name was Kyle, otherwise known as Kylie, aka the office past. And unfortunately for me, he was feeling particularly observant that day. Hey Sarah, how's my least favorite coat? Wow, you look like crap, Kyle said, unintentionally, making one of the most punchable faces that I had ever had the displeasure of laying eyes on. Oh, screw off, Kylie. I'm not in the mood. He rewarded me with a deep skull. Somehow, that made him look even more stupider. Even when he was pissed, I couldn't take him seriously. You know, I don't like it when you call me that. I expect a written apology on my desk by 4 o'clock sharp, he scoffed, his nose pointed to the ceiling. Kyle was a real-life clown. I always wondered which circus he had escaped from. Gelled blonde hair that came to a point at his forehead, a tie with laughing emojis emblazoned on its suspenders. I mean, he was the real deal. He even carried a coffee mug with the phrase certified, a stud muffin imprinted on the side. All he was missing was the red nose and face paint. You can take your apology and shove it where the sun don't shine. Kylie. Kyle stared at me stupidly, his mouth hanging open. I could tell that I was pushing him to his limit. You know what? I really don't appreciate the way you're talking to me right now. He spat, raising his voice. I know you woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, but you don't have to be such a bitch. In case you're wondering, yes, he really spelled it out letter by letter, and of course he said it loudly enough to draw the attention of several of our coworkers. I was pissed. Kyle's eyes grew wide once he realized the mistake that he had made. Kyle's eyes grew wide once he realized the mistake that he had made. Shoot, Sarah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I put my earbuds at drowning him out. Don't care. I'm reporting you to HR. I watched out of my peripheral vision as the blood drained from Kyle's face. For a guy like him, being sent to HR would be a fate worse than death. I felt a grin tugging at the corners of my lips as I watched him plead his case. After a few short minutes, our boss marched up to him and berated him for slacking off. I couldn't have dreamed it up better myself. Though it was mildly infuriating, my interaction with Kyle had done the trick to rid my mind of my psychotic boyfriend. Between that and my lack of sleep from the night before, I had somehow managed to forget all about Johnny's twisted antics. That is, until I arrived home from work. Nothing could have prepared me for what I would find. I walked through the garage door as I always did. I hung up my keys, set my purse on the kitchen table, and shuffled over to the bottle of cheap Merlot awaiting me by the sink. After the past 24 hours that I had had, I was in desperate need of a glass of wine or 5. I suddenly froze, standing still as a statue. My eyes grew wide as dinner plates in my head began to spin. Something sharp had whirred through the air just seconds prior, missing my face by mere inches. I gazed in terror at the knife jutting from the wall before me. Oh, come on, baby, you should have been expecting that. I whipped around, my fear morphing into confusion. What was going on? Johnny sauntered up to me, a manic grin stretching across his face. He leaned in close, his nose grazing mine. I could feel his warm breath on my lips and something cold pressed against my neck. It took me a moment to realize what it was. I could feel his warm breath on my lips and something cold pressed against my neck. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Johnny was holding a second knife. My heart raced a mile a minute. I told you your training begins today. I won't kill you, but I never said that I wouldn't rough you up a little. I wanted to cry, to scream, to find some way to escape, but I did none of those things. In the end, I just stood there, praying that my boyfriend wouldn't slice that serrated metal blade across my throat. Eventually, he lowered the knife and took a step back. I tried to breathe, tears welling up at the corners of my vision. Johnny crossed his arms and frowned disapprovingly. He impatiently tapped his foot as I struggled to gather my composure. That was a test, honey bunch, and you failed pretty horribly, I might add. I'll give you a solid 1 out of 10. And the only reason you even scored that high is because you didn't pass out. You got a lot of work to do. What the hell? Johnny? How am I supposed to know you'd pull something like that? You should still be at work. What happened to your job? Oh. And this I hissed, pointing to the knife sticking out of our kitchen wall. You're getting this fixed. I don't care what kind of psychotic training regimen you've got cooked up. You will not destroy the house to implement it. You got that? I glared at him, shocked at my own reaction. I guess something in me just snapped, and I was finally able to let loose on him. It felt refreshing. Johnny's twisted smirk returned to his lips. Ah, there it is. That's the kind of raw emotion that I need out of you. Don't worry about the wall. I'll have it fixed in the blink of an eye. Honestly, I was beginning to doubt you, Han. But now I think you might have what it takes after all. My heart dropped. I felt a confounding mixture of relief and dread surge within me. I wasn't so sure that having what it took was such a good thing. I'm glad to hear that, I said, flashing a weak grin, as you should be. Johnny replied, reaching around me and wrenching the knife from the wall, because if you didn't, I'd probably have to kill you. He winked at me, sending a chill rippling down my spine. Just remember, Johnny whispered, leaning in close to my ear, if I get the sense that you're not cut out for this, I won't hesitate to end you. I felt all the color drain from my face when he said that. Now that I had uncovered his secret, Johnny was so outwardly cruel. How had he managed to mask it for all those years? Understood. So what's this training regimen you have planned for me? That twisted smile returned to Johnny's face, his eyes bulging with elation. Hey, I'm glad you asked. Grab your keys. We're taking a little road trip. We took off in my Chevy Tahoe with Johnny behind the wheel. Even after demanding to know where we were going about 15 different times, he still wouldn't spill the beans. Apparently it was a surprise, and I would find out when we got there. He was definitely right about that. I did find out when we got there. And I was certainly surprised. After a little less than an hour, we rolled to a stop on a remote trail outside of the city limits. At first, I was confused. It was such an odd place to train a wannabe serial killer. And here we are. Get out, Johnny demanded, flinging open the door. Jeez, who pissed in your cornflakes? Would it have killed you to ask a little nicer? I retorted, sliding from the passenger seat and slamming my door shut. I don't give a crap, babe. What are you gonna do? Break up with me? Fat chance I get to walk in. I scowled at him before begrudgingly following his orders. I should have dumped him earlier, but then again, how was I supposed to know that Johnny was such a bad guy? Hindsight really is 20/20. I didn't bother asking where we were going this time, and Johnny led the way, eventually veering off the path and trudging through thick undergrowth. I began to get anxious. What if Johnny actually doesn't think I have what it takes? What if he's taking me out here to murder me and hide my body? I gotta keep my guard up. I grabbed the knife in my pocket tightly, hoping that Johnny didn't know that I had it. Even if I wasn't cut out to be a cold-blooded killer, I wasn't going to go down without a fight. Johnny paused abruptly. I nearly smacked into him due to how suddenly he had stopped. Hey, what gives? We're here. That's what gives, isn't it glorious? Johnny asked, extending his arm dramatically to the forest before him. What am I looking at? I didn't see anything except foliage. Was this it? Was I gonna die right here? Johnny pointed to the ground. He said, haphazardly sweeping away leaves and dirt with his foot. He revealed a rusty metal hatch. Glorious isn't exactly the word that I would use, but it's something, I guess. It sure is. Just wait until you see what's inside. I had no interest whatsoever in finding out what was inside. In fact, I would be content if I never found out what was lurking down there. But as luck would have it, I would soon discover what that hatch was harboring. What are you waiting for? Johnny asked, his signature creepy grin returning to his lips. Open it. You really are a dick, you know it. Making your girlfriend do all the heavy lifting. You should be ashamed. Blah blah, whatever. Do it before I lose my patience and decide to cave your skull in. A shiver rippled through me as I reached for the latch. I had a feeling that he was only partially kidding. The metal door creaked on its hinges as I laboriously flung it open. Inside was a ladder that must have descended at least 20 feet into the earth. I gulped, glancing at Johnny. He extended a hand toward the dark pit. Ladies first. I scowled at him. Real smooth? I see how it is. Way to be a gentleman until it benefits you. Huh? I'll remember this. I'll quit yapping and start climbing. Chop chop, we don't got all day. I pursed my lips and hoisted myself into the opening. Though I was equally annoyed and terrified before then, my fear was beginning to win out. But I pressed on, hoping that I hadn't just glimpsed the outside world for the final time. After it felt like an eternity of clinging to the rusted ladder of dear life, I finally made it to the bottom. I released my grip on the rungs, dropping down to the ground below with a satisfying thump. A small cloud of dirt kicked up beneath my feet. I took that opportunity to whip out my phone and turn on the flashlight. Johnny had closed the hatch behind him, so we had been plunged into total darkness most of the way down. Johnny joined me as I fumbled to find the flashlight. Once it was lit, my breath caught on my throat. I found myself in some sort of underground bunker. No need for that, Johnny said, flipping a switch embedded in the concrete wall. The room was suddenly bathed in a sickly yellow glow, illuminating the rustic confines. Yellow glow, illuminating the rustic confines. I blinked as the sudden burst of light assaulted my pupils, struggling to take in the scene before me. Once I did, however, I immediately wished that my vision had never returned. We were standing in a room with a large table in the center. Flecks of dried blood were caked across its wooden surface. To my left sat a shelf with rations of canned beans, corn, and bags of rice, along with several pallets of water bottles. Hallways extended on either side of the bunker. None of that frightened me. However, what really got my blood pumping was the prison cells embedded in the wall directly ahead of us. Because I noticed that one of them was not empty. Really got my blood pumping was the prison cells embedded in the wall directly ahead of us. Because I noticed that one of them was not empty. Come on, let's go, Johnny said, leading the charge. I obeyed, apprehensively tailing him up to the holding cells. My heart raced like a piston. Was my boyfriend keeping someone prisoner? Why did he even have access to this place? I was too afraid to ask. Once we made it to the rusted bars, I glanced inside each cell. The ones to the left and right were filthy. Dried blood and fecal matter littered the ground along with bones. Multiple skeletons were slumped against the walls, some still had loose flesh clinging to their decaying frames. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It took too long for the smell to register. After coming to terms with the reality of the situation, I noticed that something absolutely reeked. I held my nose, reluctantly gazing past my brooding boyfriend and into the middle cell. An emaciated man glared back at us, his body reduced to no more than skin and bones. Even so, that didn't prevent him from sending Johnny the most hateful scowl that I had ever seen to date. I didn't know what kind of history those two might have had, but one thing was clear. That man despised my boyfriend, and I didn't blame him one bit. "How's it going, Davy boy? Hope you've been well. Haven't seen you in a couple of days now," Johnny said, grinning at the husk of a man before him. "Oh, screw you. Stop toying with me, please. You've had your fun. If you're gonna kill me, just do it already." The fiery determination behind the man's eyes never faltered. He was ready to meet his maker. "Johnny, what's going on? What did you do to this man?" I whimpered, tugging on his shirt sleeve. Johnny turned to him, his expression stern. "I don't feel bad for him. He deserves it." He redirected his focus back to his dying enemy. "All right, Dave, do you want to tell her what you did? Or do you want me to do it?" I barely got the energy to keep my eyes open. "The heck do you think?" "Alrighty, story time. Johnny beamed his smirk a bit too enthusiastic. "I'll make it short, we've got business to attend. 2. You see, sweetheart, this sniveling piece of garbage right here decided one day that he was going to track me down, so he and his lackeys tailed me to the middle of nowhere and proceeded to put a bullet through my head. But I wasn't having that. Now was I, Dave? Go to hell. I'll send me a postcard, will ya? You'll find yourself there real soon. Anyway, as I was saying, this Dunner idiot and a couple other low-level mercenaries tried to take my life. But I got the jump on them. Unfortunately, though, they told of my new BMW. You remember that? Of course you don't, I didn't wreck it. This idiot did, he said, leering menacingly at Dave. He was rewarded with a week grand. So after I took out the majority of his men, old Davy here received a nasty shot to the abdomen. I took out the majority of his men. Old Davy here received a nasty shot to the abdomen. Couldn't let him die though. I mean, not yet. So I patched him up and he's been here for the past 6 months. All over a measly $50,000 bounty. Was it worth it, Dave? I sure hope so. I had never heard Johnny use such foul language before. And then again, I had never realized that he was a heartless killer until the day prior. Still, that insane amount of profanity told me that Johnny detested Dave with every fiber of his being. Worth it? Not in the slightest. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. Dave hissed, spitting what little saliva he could muster from his dry mouth in Johnny's direction. Too bad you'll never get the chance, Johnny said, producing a set of keys from his back pocket. But at least your death won't be for nothing. You're about to be used for training purposes. Johnny pulled open the metal door and he motioned for me to follow him inside. I nearly threw up. The stench grew stronger with each step forward. Take this, Johnny said, reaching into his waistband and producing a pistol. He flipped the safety off before handing it to me. My eyes grew as wide as saucers. How had I not realized it before? This was my training. Johnny wanted me to kill Dave. Careful, safety's off. I reluctantly accepted the firearm. It felt so heavy in my hands. I had never held a handgun before, let alone discharged one. A new wave of anxiety crashed over me. I just wanted to go home, having your little girlfriend do your dirty work. You're a bigger baby than I thought, Dave snarled, the corners of his cracked lips twisting into a smile. Hey babe, give me back my Glock for a second. I did as I was told, not daring to question why. Without warning, Johnny extended his arm and fired. The blast was so loud that I nearly leapt out of my skin. My ears were ringing and my hearing was taking a while to return. If I had known any better, I would have thought that something had exploded. Ugh, Dave gritted his teeth. His eyes clenched shut, he gripped his right arm tightly, and it was leaking a viscous red fluid. Unless you want a bullet to the other arm, I would suggest that you shut up. Johnny Bart turned back to me. Sorry about that, probably should have warned you here. You can have it back now, he said, returning the still warm handgun to me. I was too shell-shocked to offer any response aside from silently accepting it. Now Johnny said, sliding his arms over mine. Aim directly between the eyes. Good, you got it? Now put your finger over the trigger. My head was spinning violently, and I thought that I was going to pass out. This couldn't be happening. I didn't want to kill this man. I didn't want to kill anyone. How had I landed myself in such a messed up situation? Right as I was hovering my finger over the trigger, mentally preparing myself for what I had to do next, I was interrupted by a loud bang from somewhere overhead. The hatch. I turned back to my boyfriend, trying to gauge his reaction. He did not seem happy. My heart rate suddenly spiked again. I was beginning to think that I had been right earlier, that I might die in that bunker. Because 3 smoke grenades had been tossed into the room with us, leaking a noxious yellow-brown gas. I hope you're prepared to die, Dave snickered. Yeah, well, I hope you are too. Johnny snatched the gun from me, firing another round. Dave's expression twisted in pure agony as a dark spot began blossoming on his stomach. You! Johnny kicked him in the gut for good measure. Dave howled, tumbling over while clutching his bleeding wound. Come on, let's go. We'll leave this scumbag to rot, Johnny said, covering his nose with his shirt and shoving the handgun back into his waistband. He didn't have to tell me twice. Johnny grabbed my hand and began pulling me down a long hallway. The gaseous substance was creeping closer to us by the second. We both broke into a dead sprint, my disgruntled boyfriend leading the way while I tried my best to keep up. Johnny, where are we going? I shouted through my shirt, careful not to let it slip. I didn't know if it would do any good, but I'd like to think that it did. There's another exit just down the hallway, he replied, his eyes never wavering from his target. After running for what felt like the length of a marathon, a large metal door finally emerged into view. We had long since escaped the threat of what I had assumed was mustard gas, and my legs ached. Suddenly, however, they felt completely numb to the pain. Popping, it sounded like fireworks were going off behind us. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I quickly realized that those weren't fireworks, they were gunshots. I stole a glance back, curious as to who could possibly be pursuing us. Given the circumstances, my eyes locked into a man standing at the end of the hall. He was wearing what appeared to be a hazmat suit, along with a World War I era gas mask. Though he was a good distance behind us, I could still clearly make out the handgun that he brandished. It was aiming straight at us. John? I know, just keep running. Johnny grunted, picking up the pace. We were almost there. 2 rounds fired and 2 rounds missed. We were getting lucky. The final burst of bullets felt like it rained towards us in slow motion. It sounded like our pursuer had emptied his entire magazine. At the rate that he was shooting, I didn't blame him. Ah, you son of a... Johnny screamed. Blood began seeping from his arm. In that moment, a wave of emotions crashed over me like a tsunami. Fear, confusion, anger. They all swirled within me like some sort of nausea-inducing cocktail. In the end, rage overtook all of them. I swiftly reached into Johnny's waistband, prepared to do what both of us had neglected to in our adrenaline-infused panic. I trained the gun on our attacker, and it somehow felt lighter than before, easier to wield. I flipped the safety off and unloaded. At that distance, I feared that my attempt would be for nothing but to my utter shock. I heard a muffled howl of pain. The man with the gas mask crumpled to the floor, clutching his knee. A red blotch began to show on his white suit. I watched it tentatively as the man faded into the advancing cloud, leaving Johnny and me alone once again. Good shot, Johnny said as we finally reached the door. He flipped a few manual locks before pulling. He winced, nursing his wound. Thanks, let me get the door. I'm okay with doing your dirty work just this once, I said, heading over to help him. Well, aren't you just a doll? Thanks. With some effort, I pulled open the thick metal door. It hadn't occurred to me until that moment that I hadn't known where the heck we were running to. I was met with a cool breeze into view of the forest that we had entered from. I breathed a sigh of relief as I followed Johnny outside. How are we out here? And weren't we just underground and who? How are we out here? Weren't we just underground and who? Shoo. There might be more of them, Johnny hissed, holding a finger to his lips. Right, sorry, you can have this back, I whispered, handing Johnny his firearm. He graciously snatched it from my grasp. Thanks. Now reach into my right pocket, Johnny said, glancing downward. I did as I was told. And what am I looking for exactly? A new magazine. You emptied this one, he said, showing me the hollow mag. Right, here you go, I said, producing a crumpled newspaper article. It was the closest thing to a magazine that I had felt in there. It was the closest thing to a magazine that I had felt in there. Johnny narrowed his eyes at me. Really, Sarah? We're in a life or death situation. Now is not the time for jokes. I mentally facepalmed myself. He was speaking gun lingo. I did think it was strange that he was asking for a magazine clipping at a time like that. The stress must have twisted my mind into knots. Sorry, brain fart, I said, my cheeks blossoming with color as I handed him the real magazine. Thank you. Now, was that so hard? By the way, remind me to teach you how to load this thing later. Now follow closely behind me and stay as quiet as possible. You got that? Johnny whispered, his icy blue eyes locked fiercely onto mine. I nodded. That set of instructions was received loud and clear. Johnny and I proceeded through the underbrush, heads on a swivel. Every tiny sound of the forest was enough to make me jump. My heart was thumping like a jackrabbit. I was certain that at any moment somebody would pop off from behind a tree and put a bullet through my skull. But for the time being, nobody did. We continued to creep along, alert yet unbothered. Most of our trek was an upward trajectory, which was not easy on my sorely out-of-shape 27-year-old knees, but it did explain why we had ended up outside. The bunker was inside of a hill. By the time that we had reached the top, I was almost wheezing. I was having a difficult time steadying my breathing, but to my immense luck, the adrenaline was still doing its job. After all, I could still lose my life at a moment's notice. Johnny pulled me behind a tree as we scanned our surroundings. No armed gas mask, wearing lunatics for as far as the eye could see, which admittedly wasn't that far due to the number of trees blocking my line of sight, but you catch my draft. Johnny suddenly leaned in close, as if he was about to kiss me. My heart thundered in my chest, and not due to the terror coursing through my veins. I then voluntarily blushed, my cheeks burning red. The car shouldn't be much further. We're most likely to encounter resistance there. Keep following closely behind me. You're doing great, he whispered. I pursed my lips and nodded. Where had my mind drifted off to? I needed to focus. I put my head down and shifted my attention back to where it should have been the entire time, staying alive. I stuck to my boyfriend like white on rice. We took an alternate route back to the vehicle, so as to not be seen, but eventually we made it back unscathed. That was strange. I wasn't a professional by a long shot, but it felt like there should have been at least somebody trying to stop us on our way back. Had the hazmat guy really come after us alone? As my Tahoe came into view, I noticed something. There was a blacked-out SUV with tinted windows parked directly beside it. That must have belonged to our attacker. Johnny was still half-crouched as he approached my car. He turned back to me. Handgun so ready to fire, keep watch while I check your car for bugs, okay? Can we do that later? We kinda need to get out of here, I retorted, surveying the trail and the surrounding forest like I had been asked. Do you want to go boom the second the keys slide into the ignition? No. Then let me do this. I released an exasperated sigh. You had a good point. I did not want to be blown to smithereens on the off chance that my car was rigged to explode. So I did as I was told. I was suddenly snatched from my reverie by a flash from behind me. My eyes widened as I opened my mouth to scream. By a flash from behind me. My eyes widened as I opened my mouth to scream. Before I could react, I watched a man pick himself up off the ground from below the black SUV and race up to me. He yanked me toward his hulking form and pressed my back into his sweaty chest while holding a knife to my throat. I was in so much shock that the scream I was planning to unleash had died on my lips. Needless to say, I was absolutely mortified. Come out with your hands up or the girl gets it. The man growled at Johnny, who had made it to the other side of the car by that point. I'm giving you until the count of 3. Get out here by then, or your little girlfriend here won't be breathing the next time you see her. Hearing those words sent my head into a frenzy. By then, or your little girlfriend here won't be breathing the next time you see her. Hearing those words sent my head into a frenzy. Sweat prickled my back like sewing needles, and the grim reality of my situation was beginning to sink in fast. Time was ticking, and to make matters worse, Johnny probably wouldn't give a single crap if I died. I quivered against the grip of the man holding onto me. His forearms were about as wide as my waist, so fighting back wouldn't be my smartest choice. My modest butterfly knife would probably feel like a toothpick to that giant. After weighing my options, I came to a sickening realization. I didn't have any options to weigh. All I could do was stand there uselessly and pray that Johnny would think of something to get us both out of this unscathed. 1. My assailant growled. Time's running out. You don't want to know what happens when I get to 3. His threats didn't work. Johnny stayed motionless behind my car. He couldn't be doing this to me. Was my boyfriend really going to let me die? 2. My heart jackhammered violently against my rib cage. This was it. These are my final moments. Pressed against some sweat-soaked stranger with a knife clutched against my throat, I squeezed my eyes shut, a single tear trickling down my cheek. Throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, a single tear trickling down my cheek. 1 second more, and I would be erased from existence. 3. Gunfire, a sudden rapid succession of gunfire assaulted my ears. To my utter shock and relief, the meaty arm holding the blade to my throat slipped limply off of me. I was free, and more importantly, I wasn't dead. I apprehensively opened my eyes. Johnny stood at the hood of my car, his handgun still pointed toward me. He calmly lowered it to his side. His gaze stuck to something behind me. I began to feel lightheaded as I turned around. What I saw still haunts me to this day. The man who had grabbed me was lying on the ground. His eyes stared listlessly up at the evening sky, never to regain his vision. 3 bullet holes marred his forehead, little rivulets of crimson smearing his face with blood. I was mortified, but even so, I couldn't bring myself to look away. It was like watching a train wreck I knew that I shouldn't watch. But something internally forced me to continue that blank, lifeless expression that could have been me if Johnny had been too late, or if the man with the gas mask had better aim, I could have been me. If Johnny had been too late, or if the man with the gas mask had better aim, I could have ended up just like that. I'd had multiple brushes with death in the span of a few minutes, and now it was looking me right in the face. Sarah, Johnny said, ending our nauseating staring match. Yeah, I whimpered, numbly meeting his gaze. Let's go home, I nodded despondently, making my way to the passenger seat. Once we were inside, Johnny slipped the keys into the ignition, and we were on our way. We sat in tense silence for most of the drive back. After about 20 or so minutes, Johnny finally spoke. Good shooting back there. Thanks, I muttered, staring straight ahead. Yeah, you probably saved our lives, you know. I'm lucky the bullet only grazed my arm. Nothing serious. We both might have been dead if it wasn't for your quick thinking. I couldn't bring myself to hold a conversation. In all honesty, I was barely even paying attention to what Johnny was saying. No matter what I tried, I just couldn't get the image of that man's lifeless corpse out of my head. You see dead people all the time in video games and TV shows, but seeing one up close in person, it does something to you. It's a shock to the system. Watching someone go from actively moving and speaking and interacting with the world around them to lying motionless in the dirt in a matter of seconds. It feels wrong. I didn't say anything for the remainder of the ride home. So many questions had been joggling around in my brain just minutes prior. But after the incident, they all evaporated into thin air. I didn't know how to feel. I was stuck somewhere between being grateful to be alive, deeply saddened for the man who had been killed, and insanely spiteful for being placed in that situation in the first place. My emotions were completely out of whack. Sarah, I'm going inside now. Stay out here for as long as you need. I know that was tough to see. I may be training you to be a killer, but I don't want to break you. And after all, I'm still your boyfriend. I'm here if you need anything, Johnny said, lightly shaking my shoulder before closing the driver's side door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Once Johnny stepped across the threshold of our home, it all came flooding out. Tears surged down my cheeks like a busted fire hydrant. The dam had broken, and all those pent-up emotions came rushing out. I sat there bawling my eyes out for a long time. I'd had to process so much in the past few days. I can't even begin to describe the amount of stress and anxiety the whole ordeal had caused me. The person I'd loved the most had turned out to be a psychotic murderer, and on top of that there were people who were actively trying to kill him. It was all too much to bear. Eventually, I was able to calm myself down. While it did feel good to get it out of my system, something still gnawed at me. Was it guilt? Remorse? I can't say for certain, but I had a sinking feeling that for as long as I was Johnny's puppet, I wouldn't have any chance at getting rid of it. Johnny didn't pester me about any more training for a couple weeks after that. I took some time off from work to recuperate, and honestly things were starting to look up. My mental health was slowly but surely restoring itself until I returned to the office and it all came crashing back down. I had just clocked out for the day and I was heading for my car when my favorite coworker in the entire world decided to approach me in the parking lot. Obviously, I was just trying to talk to him. Hey, Sarah? I turned to find Kyle standing by my vehicle. Between his goofy tie with dollar bills imprinted on it, his stupid, dorky suspenders, and the pathetic look stamped across his face, Kyle was looking more slappable than I had ever seen him. And that was really saying something. I sighed, reluctantly facing him, my hand resting firmly on my door handle. What is it, Kyle? I have something for you. You know, as an apology, I want to say sorry for a few weeks ago. I pursed my lips. Can this wait until tomorrow? I really need to get home. Please, Sarah, I have to do this, he said, tears brimming at the corners of his eyes. I mentally face-bombed myself. While it was true that I had very little sympathy for Kyle, it seemed like the regret of his actions was really getting to him. As much as Johnny wanted me to be, I wasn't completely heartless. Fine, but make it quick, okay? I need to get started on dinner. Oh, thank you. Thank you. You're gonna love it. Kyle beamed, leading me toward his car. I had a feeling that whatever it was, I would not love it. But miracles do happen, so I decided to temporarily suspend disbelief. Kyle began to look anxious as he led me through the parking lot, constantly adjusting his glasses, glancing around apprehensively, nervously biting his fingernails. Just when I was beginning to think that I should turn and leave, we reached our destination. A lone black SUV sat at the far end of the parking lot. It's in here. Come closer so I can give it to you, Kyle said, flashing me a weak grin. My heart thumped wildly in my chest, and I began to instinctively back away. Kyle's unibrow furrowed in confusion. What's wrong, Sarah? Kyle, you don't drive an SUV. You own a Prius. Suddenly, for the second time in a matter of weeks, I felt a brawny man wrap his meaty arms around me. My eyes grew wide and adrenaline crashed through my system. This couldn't be happening. Not again. The next thing I knew, I was being forcefully shoved towards the SUV. Kyle held open the door. He mouthed an unapologetic, "I'm sorry" to me as I was thrown into the back seat. "Get in," my masked assailant demanded. "But I did what you asked. Why do I have to get in the car?" Kyle retorted, crossing his bony arms. The man bounced Kyle's head off the side of the vehicle with a loud thud. That was all the convincing he needed. "Okay, point taken," he muttered, sliding into the seat beside me. "Who are you people? What do you want with me?" I asked, failing to subdue the quiver in my voice. The figure in the passenger seat turned to us, removing his ski mask. A deathly thin man smiled at me, showcasing rows of disgusting yellow-brown teeth. I could feel all the blood rush from my face upon laying eyes on him. "Does that answer your question, miss?" he replied, that repulsive grin never leaving his cracked lips. I cocked my head to the side like a curious dog. That did not answer my question. In fact, I was more confused than ever. "Dan, I thought you were dead." He scowled at me, that creepy smirk finally erasing itself from his face. "It's Dave. Your boyfriend almost killed me, and you can't even remember my name. Don't you think I deserve that much at the very least?" "Sorry, my bad. Dave, how are you alive?" I was trembling at that point. Dave had been shot multiple times and nearly starved to death and bombarded with mustard gas. By all means, he should have been sitting pretty in hell by then. That hideous smile inched across his face once again. "You remember the gas that we inoculated the bunker with, yes?" I nodded. "That wasn't mustard gas. It was colored smoke. My boys had a hunch that you two morons would be too stupid to tell the difference, and it appears that they were correct. I will admit, the bullet wounds were pretty nasty, but I managed to pull through. Screw you for that, by the way. I don't care if it wasn't you who pulled the trigger. You did nothing to stop it." I slumped down in my seat, breaking his gaze. Dave was right. I had stood by like a helpless child as my boyfriend had brutally shot a man multiple times. While I didn't cause his anguish, I wasn't innocent either. "You almost died. So what? What does any of that have to do with me?" Kyle interjected, his cheeks burning red with what I assumed to be a mixture of fear and anger. Dave shifted his focus to Kyle. That seemed to destroy his tough guy act. "You've seen too much, son. Did you seriously think we were going to let you off scot-free? You wouldn't know how to keep your mouth shut if it was wired closed. Hate to break it to you, but you're not going anywhere. All the color drained from Kyle's face. He began anxiously fidgeting with his suspenders, terrified to ask what I had been thinking all along. In a shaky voice, he choked out, "What are you going to do to us?" Dave snickered, a demented laugh erupting from his chest. He managed to elicit 3 hearty chuckles before they devolved into a violent coughing fit. What he said next made my blood run cold. "You, my boy, you're going to die." Upon hearing that, Kyle thrashed wildly in a futile attempt at escaping the vehicle. He threw the door open only to be met with the same man who had forced him into the car moments prior. The behemoth shoved Kyle aside, squeezing into the back seat beside him. "Don't get any crazy ideas. Even if you do somehow manage to escape, I'll put a bullet in your head faster than you can move." To escape, I'll put a bullet in your head faster than you can move. Kyle gulped, then settled into his seat. His spindly appendages were pressed tightly against me, which I found absolutely repulsive, but due to the lack of space, I wasn't able to shove him off. As if that wasn't bad enough, his obnoxiously strong cologne permeated my nostrils, making it difficult to concentrate on the matter at hand. "Is there any way you'll let me live? I'm an accountant. Maybe I could be useful to you. I'm especially handy during tax season," Kyle pleaded, the reality of our situation apparently smacking him like a ton of bricks. "Sorry, no can do, buddy. Sometimes people get dealt a crappy hand in life. Unfortunately for you, this is how it has to be," Dave replied, staring out the windshield. I craned my neck towards Kyle. Tears silently flowed down his cheeks. This was all my fault. As much as I despised that man, he didn't deserve to die. If I had just let Johnny murder me like he had originally planned, no one would have had to lose their life just to lure me into a vehicle. The roar of the engine snapped me from my trance. Before I knew it, we were off. The roar of the engine snapped me from my trance. Before I knew it, we were off. "Aren't you gonna, blindfold us or something?" Kyle asked the mountain of a man shoved up against him. I mentally rolled my eyes. Why would you even ask that? Was he trying to make it easier for them to kill us? No need. You can't snitch if you're lying 6 feet under. I could feel Kyle's body trembling against mine. Truth be told, I was probably trembling a little bit myself. I wanted to live just as much as Kyle did. I wish there was some way that both of us could make it out of there. To escape that nightmare and return back to our slow, monotonous routines. But that just wasn't in the cards. After an excruciatingly long drive with Kyle's bony elbow jabbing into my ribs, we pulled up to a secluded warehouse. It looked run down and abandoned. Exactly the kind of place you'd expect a murder to go down in. My breathing began to intensify as the car rolled to a stop. This was it. In what I assumed would be a matter of minutes, Kyle and I would both be dead. As I was jerked from the back seat, my brain scrambled to think of any way out of that situation. Maybe I could run. No, that was clearly off the table. Dave and his men would surely hunt me down. Fighting wasn't an option either. It appeared as if my only choice was to resign myself to my fate and pray that somehow my boyfriend would swoop into the rescue. I knew it was a long shot, but it was the only shred of hope that I had left. That pipe dream was instantly shattered upon entering the warehouse. Johnny was sitting in a chair in the center of the expansive space, blindfolded. Blood was splattered all over his white shirt, and his arms were marred with deep lacerations. His head hung low, whether out of shame or exhaustion, I have no clue. We were led to where Johnny sat. Dave snapped his fingers, and one of his goons disappeared around a high stack of pallets, only to return seconds later, carrying 2 rickety chairs. He slapped one of them down beside Johnny's motionless form, while he placed the other directly across from him. I was yanked by the arm toward the chair adjacent to Johnny, while Kyle was seated beside him. "Would it kill you to be a little bit gentler?" I hissed at the man tying me to my chair. Sarah, is that you?" Johnny asked weakly, perking up at the sound of my voice. "Yes, it's me, Johnny." I squeaked back, still shocked at the state that he was in. It was hard to see him like that. Though I was disgusted with Johnny for taking people's lives, a big part of me still loved him. He had been my whole world for an entire 3 years. As much as I wished I could dispel my feelings for him, I just couldn't, and it'd hurt me to see the man I loved in pain like that. Let her go. Please, I'm the one you want. She did nothing wrong. Do whatever you want of me. But I swear if you touch one hair on that woman's head, I will rip every one of your hearts out and eat them for dinner. Tears began to cloud my vision. Even if it was just an act, it really seemed like Johnny still cared about me. Maybe he wasn't the stone-cold killer I'd made him out to be after all. Dave marched up to him. He punched Johnny hard across the jaw. A pang of sorrow stabbed my heart like an ice pick when his closed fist connected with my boyfriend's face. It looked like it hurt a lot. Connected with my boyfriend's face. It looked like it hurt a lot. Shut up, Dave spat, swiping Johnny's blindfold off. Upon making eye contact with Dave, his face twisted in confusion. How? You should be dead right now. I killed you. That nauseating grin returned to Dave's lips. His eyes lit up. He was living for this. No, you thought you'd killed me. You broke the golden rule of murder, Johnny boy. Always make sure your victims are dead. Johnny's expression melted from one of confusion to grim understanding. So the gas, it was all a facade. There you go. Now you're using your noggin. Johnny scowled up at the thin man hovering over him. Come here for a minute. There's something I have to tell you, Johnny said, as if he had a secret that he was itching to share. Dave obliged, stooping to face level once they were staring eye to eye. Johnny spat in Dave's face. He immediately recoiled, furiously swiping the spittle away. Yeah, take that, you scumbag, Kyle chimed in, grinning from ear to ear. Johnny turned to him, his brows knitted together. Who are you? And why do you look like you're supposed to be hosting the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards? Even in our dire situation, I couldn't help but giggle. Kyle really did look like he'd be at home on the set of some wacky award show. Kyle frowned at him. I'll have you know that. You, Dave barked, jabbing a finger in Kyle's direction. You shut up. And you, he said, turning back to Johnny, you'll pay for that. Oh, I'm so scared. What are you gonna do? Kill me? Do it already? I dare you. Dave glowered at him before approaching one of his men. He stood on his toes, whispering something into the man's ear. His lackey nodded before heading toward the direction we had come from. Sarah, Johnny said, a fiery determination scrawled across his countenance. Yes, I'm sorry for dragging you into this. You don't deserve to be here. I never should for dragging you into this. You don't deserve to be here. I never should have gotten you involved. What? So you should have killed me instead. No, I should have been more careful. This could have been avoided if I hadn't tried to include you in my messed up hobby. Who knows? Maybe these guys wouldn't have found me, and we'd still be a happy couple right now. The sincerity in his voice struck me. As much as I wanted to reject his apology, I couldn't bring myself to do it. It's okay. I forgive you. Not for murdering those other people, but for getting me involved. You don't deserve it in the slightest, but I still love you. I love you too, honey. No matter what happens, I will keep loving you, even in death. Tears began to cloud my vision. I wanted to run up and throw my arms around him. What I wouldn't give for everything to just go back to how it was. I had such a wonderful life before, and I'd taken it all for granted. You guys, you're making my heart skip a beat, Kyle said. Johnny turned to him, eyes narrowed. Dude, shut up. I still have no clue who you even are. I'm your wife's favorite coworker, Kyle replied, beaming at Johnny. Kyle, didn't Johnny just tell you to shut up? Seriously, stop talking though, I hissed, glaring intensely at him. Kyle's expression dropped, and he finally did as he was told. At that moment, Dave's cohort returned, holding what appeared to be a large metal container with a pair of tongs. My eyes grew wide. A sickening feeling overtook me. Whatever that man was holding, I knew that it couldn't be good. Dave and his companion marched up to Johnny. Dave grabbed a fistful of his hair, violently yanking his head back. Any last words, Johnny boy? Johnny smiled. Go ahead, kill me. I'll tell the devil to reserve a special spot for you in hell. As you wish, Dave replied, motioning for the man to proceed. No, don't do this, I shrieked, but my plea fell on deaf ears. I was forced to watch as molten metal was poured into Johnny's right eye socket. I have never heard screams like that in my darkest nightmares. They were guttural, primal. Even now, I still can't erase that sound from my head. I cried openly as convulsions racked Johnny's entire body. He went limp as the liquid metal cooled where his steely blue iris once was. Is that all you got? Dave frowned. He was obviously perturbed at Johnny's resilience. No, it's not. Again, Dave ordered, pulling Johnny's head back. His henchman poured the molten substance into Johnny's good eye, rendering him completely blind. Those ungodly shrieks. The amount of guilt I felt in that moment is indescribable. I can't even fathom the amount of pain that Johnny must have been going through. My boyfriend's body again fell limp against his restraints this time. He didn't say anything. I wailed, my lamented cries echoing throughout the expansive warehouse. I couldn't contain my anguish any longer. Finish the job, Dave demanded. The man poured the scalding liquid one final time. Johnny suddenly began thrashing wildly as the burning substance traveled down his throat. No, this can't be happening, I murmured. The amount of pain I felt in that moment is beyond what words can convey. The amount of pain I felt in that moment is beyond what words can convey. I'd watched the love of my life die in one of the most gruesome ways imaginable, and I was completely powerless to stop it. All I could do was helplessly sit and watch through a torrent of cloudy tears. Dave tossed Johnny's lifeless corpse aside. It smacked the concrete floor with a thud, still bound to the chair. Solidifying silver-colored metal leaked from Johnny's mouth and pooled onto the cold ground. I could only stare numbly at it from my own bound position. Dave kicked Johnny hard in the skull. Obviously, he didn't react. Keep my spot in Satan's domain nice and warm for me, all right? He grinned before spitting on Johnny's head. Then he turned his attention to Kyle. My heart dropped. I couldn't watch that again. I was still failing to process the death of my boyfriend just moments prior. Dave wouldn't really be so heartless as to end Kyle's life in the same manner. Kyle's chair quivered. Even from the distance I was at, I could make out a dark spot blossoming around his crotch and traveling down his pant leg. I waited with stifled breath for Dave to determine Kyle's fate. Did that look appealing to you? Dave asked, pacing back and forth before Kyle like a shark honing in for the kill. No, not at all. But please, mister, I don't want to die. Kyle sobbed, tears freely flowing down his cheeks. Well, in that case, Dave replied, placing a hand on his chin and staring thoughtfully at the ceiling. You'll let me go? Really? Kyle asked, perking up. Where the hell did you get that idea? No, I'm not going to let you go. But at the same time, I don't think. You deserve that, Dave retorted, motioning to the shiny-eyed cadaver who was once my boyfriend. Kyle's expression instantly dropped again. What are you going to do? I'm going to kill you, obviously. This should do the trick, Dave snarled, producing a 9mm from his waistband. My eyes grew wide as dinner plates. I couldn't bring myself to look. The last image I saw before squeezing my eyes shut will haunt me forever. Dave was smiling maniacally, aiming his handgun at Kyle's forehead. Then I heard it. One deafening shot. My heart hammered against my rib cage and my blood pressure spiked. I hesitantly opened my eyes, hoping that somehow my ears were playing tricks on me. But to my immense horror, I had heard correctly. Kyle's head was cocked to the side, a red hoy boring into his temple. My mouth fell open. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I never thought the day would come where I would gaze into Kyle's glassy eyes as blood oozed from the side of his head. I never wanted that day to come. Yet here it was. Before I had a chance to process what had just happened, Dave marched up to me. He towered over me like a lion, ready to devour its prey. I scowled up at him. I hated Dave with every fiber of my being. Johnny was right about him. He did deserve to die. I hope you didn't think I'd forgotten about you over here. You sure are pretty. That psychotic prick didn't know how good he had it, Dave said, tracing a gnarled finger across my jawline. I didn't waste any time. I clamped down on the grimy digit, sinking my teeth in as far as they would go. On the grimy digit, sinking my teeth in as far as they would go. Dave yanked his finger from my mouth, scraping off a large chunk of skin in the process. He slapped me so hard that stars began dancing across my vision. I dazedly smiled at the maniac, spitting out a tattered shred of flesh onto the ground. Dave's frown melted into a smirk. Hate to break it to you hot stuff, but that's my line. However, I'm going to help you out a bit on that front. Dave motioned for the man holding the liquid metal to make his way over to us. He diligently obliged. What are you going to do with that? Send me to my grave, be my guest. I hissed. Something inside of me had snapped. I didn't care anymore as long as I was giving Dave as much shit as possible. Nothing else mattered. No, I'm not actually. You see, Sarah, I never claimed that you were gonna die. No, you're gonna play a much more vital role in all this. Someone has to take the fall for this, and it's not going to be me. Dave cackled, only for his laughs to again quickly devolve into body-racking coughs. You do understand the implications, yes? My heart dropped into my toes. That wasn't possible. And was it? Oh yeah? And how are you gonna pull that off? Well, I'm gonna start off with this, Dave said, pulling a knife from his belt. He dipped it into the molten liquid before flicking a few droplets onto my hands. I involuntarily screamed in pain. What is that supposed to accomplish? I asked through gritted teeth. The sensation of burning metal against my bare flesh was absolutely excruciating. That's a clue for the police. Aside from that, we have everything we need. Your vehicle is being driven here as we speak. We hacked in your laptop a few days back. It'll be pretty bad when the cops find a search for the temperature that lead melts at in your search history, along with a receipt in your trunk for rope and gags, among other suspicious items, conveniently from a store with no working cameras. And in case you haven't noticed, all my men are masked and wearing gloves. You are the only one with DNA at the crime scene. All that's left is the smoking gun. A sickening realization washed over me. He was right. They were really going to try and pin this on me. I'm going to leave this here, Dave said, placing his handgun on the ground. He slit the rope, binding my hands together, effectively freeing me from my restraints. If you decide to shoot me, so be it. Now that I've had my revenge, I'm ready to meet my maker. The choice is yours. My brain was in too much distress to see reason. All of my logical decision-making had jumped out the window. I was seeing red. I lunged for the firearm, expecting someone to try and stop me, but I was met with no resistance. I should have taken that as a sign. Insistence, I should have taken that as a sign. I shakily held the gun to Dave's smiling face. Say hey to Johnny for me. I closed my eyes and squeezed the trigger, expecting to hear that same deafening pow that I had heard just minutes prior, but it never came. Instead, a nauseating click told me everything I needed to know. Dave turned to me, that revolting, toothy grin returning to his lips. My stomach twisted itself into knots. How could I be so stupid? Due to my blind rage, I'd fallen right into his trap. The 9mm clattered to the ground as the weight of my blender sank, and thank you, dear. Your fingerprints are now all over an illegal firearm with the serial number scratched off. We'll be taking our leave. Now one of my boys is calling in an anonymous tip from a payphone as we speak. A little piece of advice for you. Try not to drop the soap. I couldn't bring myself to respond. First, my boyfriend and coworker were killed before my eyes. Now it seemed that I was going to be pinned for the crime. All I could do was sink to my knees, bury my face in my hands, and cry. The cops showed up around 5 minutes later. Just as Dave had foretold, they slapped me in cuffs and drove me down to the station. I couldn't even blame them. The evidence was stacked so high against me that you would need binoculars to see the top. I never stood a chance. That's the entire reason I've decided to tell my story, not to oust my ex-boyfriend or to get revenge on Dave. I'm telling you this to clear my name. They didn't find any evidence against either of them. Instead, I'm sitting on death row, framed for a series of crimes that I did not commit. In case you're wondering, my cellmate managed to smuggle the cell phone in. That's what I'm using to communicate this to you. I'm typing this not only as a way to get it off my chest, but also as a warning. Be wary of who you surround yourself with, because you never know who's harboring a dark side just below the surface. Abrax